Auckland Park, the disciplinary hearing into the head of news and current affairs at the SABC Phatiswa Magopeni continues. She's pled not guilty after being accused of allowing an episode of a documentary program to be broadcast when a court had ruled the episode could not be shown. But she said the people responsible for broadcasting the episode sit 3 levels below her, and that the decision to charge her was taken after the ANC complained that she had refused to broadcast an interview with ANC leader President Cyril Ramaphosa just before the local elections. The ANC's head of elections, Fikile Mbalula, has claimed that the ANC lost support in those polls because the SABC insisted on broadcasting problems with service delivery, or focused on problems with service delivery around the country. William Bird is the head of Media Monitoring Africa. He joins us now. William, good afternoon to you. There's a complex issue. There are claims of political interference, there are claims of wrongdoing. Where do you stand on all of this? What do you think's happening?
Well, obviously we've got to wait to hear what the outcome of the DC itself is, so that's pretty hard to determine because what you're seeing now is quite different ideas being put forward. But I think on a principled level, the issue is this, is that the head of news, the buck stops with the head of news. That's what's in the editorial policies. We, among others, fought very hard for that to be the case, that the head of news is the one finally responsible for editorial decisions around news and current affairs programming. This was a news and current affairs program. It was broadcast when it shouldn't be in direct contempt of court. So the person that should, on a very principled level, be the one to be held accountable should then be your head of news. Whether or not she's then responsible for that, or whether she was negligent in her behavior around that, I guess is part of what has to be dealt with at this DC. What you have to hope is that she's able to say, well, these and these and these steps are the ones that we took to ensure that it didn't get broadcast despite these and these efforts. The program was broadcast anyway. So on a basic level, you want to say, well, look here, if we had found out that the SABC had not acted against that, when it was in contempt of court, then we'd all be saying, well, how, what the SABC is this and this, why haven't they charged someone about this when it's a very serious thing to be in contempt of court? So you can kind of understand it from that perspective. Of course, you then bring in the issues around the ANC and the complexity there, and this is a hotbed. It's a big old mess that, quite frankly, as you know only too well, having been at the SABC previously, that the politics there is just, it's deep, it's embedded in so many respects and angles. There's factional issues, there's all sorts of things to kind of try and unpack and deal with. And the allegations that Phatiswa Magopeni has made against the CEO and the board chair are things that do need to be answered. They need to be aired so that we can understand, well, what is the issue that's there? Is this an issue of timing, or is this a case of, that they did in fact only act on after the SABC issue? What I do think is interesting is that this is the board that has most clearly and most unambiguously taken a stand against editorial interference. The fact that they've lodged a complaint with the IEC about the ANC's behavior, I mean, that's unprecedented just in and of itself. If you look at the history of this board and of the senior management, including Phatiswa, obviously, in that Magopeni, in that realm, you'll see that they have taken clear and unambiguous stances against editorial interference at the SABC. It's something that I think they've done really, really well. So for us to be at this point, it's really, really disheartening. But again, it is being held in the open, so people can watch and make up their mind, and hopefully the DC will come to a firm ruling in one way or the other.
Well, I was going to bring that up. I mean, the fact that we're having this in the open now, we have had Hladi Motseneng, and we'll have more on him in a moment, William. But in fact, he had a DC that was open, but I think that was for a very different reason. The fact that this hearing's being broadcast live, that's really important. No matter what the finding is, we'll all be able to know what case was brought, and crucially, what defence was brought.
And usually these things are held behind closed doors, and there's generally a really good reason for that, in that this is a Labour issue, but it is, given the gravity of it and given the seniority of the person and the kind of issues that are at stake, I think that they were right to go and apply for it to be made open to the public so that we can see and get a sense of what happens. Because had it been behind closed doors, which would in the normal course of things been a fair and appropriate way of dealing with this, people would have immediately have said, well, it was fixed, or it was rigged, or so-and-so and such and such. By doing this, it makes it that much harder for people to say, well, it was rigged or it was fixed, etc., etc. So that is an important step in basic process. And again, the fact that you've got this process happening, that they are actually following process. We forget, the lunacy of the Motsoeneng era where there wasn't any process. That the whole point of the public protector's report about the SABC was when governance, when good governance fails. It wasn't just one thing. It was every other damn system that was set up. Here we're seeing systems, we're seeing processes being followed, we're seeing things being pursued. You saw, I think on so many levels, while people may be quick to say, oh, this is the SABC going back to the way it was. No, I don't think that is correct at all.
That's a very interesting point that you make. In fact, we've got live pictures that now. I mean, this is what's happening in the hearing itself as we expect it to resume. And just watching them, you're sort of reminded of how unprecedented this is. Somewhere, I suspect, Glynis Breitenbach is watching this and thinking, well, this all started at the National Prosecuting Authority so many years ago and what that's done for natural justice, but that's a different question. I must ask you about Hlaudi Motsoeneng, William, because there was this ruling we saw today from the High Court in Tshwane that Hlaudi Motsoeneng, the former Chief Operating Officer of the SABC, was now paid back this massive bonus he was given. And, I mean, you will recall the quite bizarre press conferences that Motsoeneng gave during this time. I remember putting questions to him about it. He refused to answer them. He said that it was all legal. Now we know that this was an illegal payment. He has to pay the money back.
Yeah, I mean, this is great. I'm going to just do a little jig in my chair for fear of, disrupting the screen, because this is really significant and it's really important, and for a number of reasons. I mean, look, it's never nice to dance for joy at someone else's profound misfortune and breaking the law, but the reality is that this is, on some level, a very clear and firm and unambiguous means of holding him accountable for the issues and the way that he behaved at that time. So if you go back to it, you see that he was running the SABC as his own personal fiefdom. He was in control. He was giving instructions to the board and not the other way around. He was, giving instructions to the minister. He was, liaising, doing all sorts of things, setting his own. Remember, he also gave himself a really nice bonus that one year as well. So it wasn't just this issue of this payback. And he was then going and negotiating deals, even in many instances without the board. He was changing decisions again without the board's knowledge even. So he was behaving in a way that was completely and utterly unaccountable. And what this does is it says, no, there are limits here, and this is a limit. You may have thought that was okay behavior just because everyone at the time was allowing it. So that's Parliament hang their heads in shame, abysmal performance at the time. The SABC board, despicable performance at the time. And similarly with the minister, complicity, failure to act, abject failures on their part that all helped construct and allow this particular scenario to play out. So when you get the court that comes and says, no, this is unacceptable, and the cherry on the top is that this was taken by the SABC and the SIU. And that's really significant because you've got the SABC itself going and saying, this kind of behavior we are not prepared to tolerate. It's not part of what we need to be as a corporation that follows basic principles of good governance. So, he's going to have a less than merry festive season this time, but he should have thought about that before dishing out himself lots of money.
He's not the only one who's involved. I mean, you've mentioned other people. The minister at the time was Faith Mutambi. I don't know if she's really been held accountable. She's still a member of parliament for the ANC, if I remember correctly. Senior member of parliament, come to think of it. Yep. I'm not aware of any of the members of that board, as you say, Hlaudi Motsoeneng, giving instructions to the board rather than the other way around, and certainly reporting on it. I think that impression was very easy to get. None of them have been held accountable either. They also received money. One of them received a luxury car, or the use of a luxury car. There's still a problem with accountability for what happened during that era?
Yes, completely. I think of the SOS did some research on it, and I forget how many of the recommendations that came out of that parliamentary inquiry were actually followed, but there weren't that many that were actually adhered to. As far as I'm aware, there's not been any form of accountability for the events that went down. There's been no formal apology. There's been no acknowledgement of their abject failure by Parliament, by the board, or certainly by Mr. Motsoeneng, which I guess makes this particular ruling that much more meaningful, precisely because he's never accepted and said, the way that I behaved was completely, utterly irresponsible and grotesque, and all of the stress, the pain, the trauma that he put so many people at the SABC through. Obviously, of course, among those the SABC 8. Remember, this was his thing. He decided to. He drafted editorial policies off his own bat that were completely and utterly inadequate and hopeless. he didn't follow due process for any of those things, even on the local content issues, handing out money to his friends, giving jobs to pals, etc., etc. So, a lot of those things have still not been accounted for. The SABC, to its credit, when the new board came in and the new senior management team came in, and both of them must get credit for this, they had hearings and inquiries to unpack what happened and to try and get the SABC onto a bit more of a solid footing to try and deal with it. So they've made some effort, but Parliament, again, it's a bit like many of these other state capture projects, and I think that this must be seen in that light. I don't think that we're going to see much accountability for those anytime soon.
William Bird, really do appreciate the time. Thank you very much indeed. Director at Media Monitoring Africa, joining us this Friday afternoon. Just to update you on the hearing into Phatiswa Magopeni, it's now stood down until Monday. It will resume on Monday. There's live pictures direct from that hearing, which has been underway through the day and will resume again on Monday.